Hey guys, so we're moving on to the last set of notes in Unit 1, and that's the 1.5 notes. To finish talking about angles, we're going to talk about what are called linear angles and what are called vertical angles. Those are two different types of angles, okay? So let me show you by looking at an example. We're going to be given an example where we're going to see pictures of 4 different angles here. So we've got angle 3, which would identify this one, angle 4, which would identify that one, angle 1 would be this angle, and angle 2, which would be that angle, okay? So we have 4 different angles that are shown, and then we're given pieces of information about each of the angles. So first thing that it tells us is that the measure of angle 4 is 141 degrees, so 141 degrees, and it wants us to find angles 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so it only gives us one piece of information, but we can find out everything else by knowing what vertical and linear angles are. So vertical angles are the angles that are across from one another that are equal. So vertical angles here would be angle 4 and angle 2. So if angle 4 is 141 degrees, then angle 2 is also 141 degrees. So we found the measure of that one right off the back. Then if you look, angle 3 and angle 4 make a line, which remember, a line is 180 degrees. So that means in order to find angle 3, I'm going to take 180 degrees and I'm going to subtract out 141 degrees and get my answer for angle 3, which is 39 degrees. Okay, so the measure of angle 3 is 39 degrees. And then again, looking straight across from angle 3 and using the vertical angles rule, anything that are vertical angles are equal or congruent. So if angle 3 is 39, then angle 1 must also be 39. And we just found the measures of the 3 angles given one piece of information. Okay? So then they're going to ask you in ALEKS to identify linear pairs and vertical angles. So remember, a linear pair is the same thing as a supplementary angle. So linear pairs is the same thing as a supplementary angle, and what they do is they share a side, okay? So linear pairs share a side, which means that they make a 180 degree line, right? So they add up to be 180 degrees. So that tells me that the measure of angle 1 in this picture, in order to be a linear pair, plus the measure of angle 2 in this picture, must be equal to 180 degrees because they make a linear pair. And then another thing to remember is that congruent means that they are equal in size. So vertical angles don't share a side, but vertical angles on the opposite side of things share a vertex. They share a middle point. So notice the pictures of vertical angles here would be angle 1 and angle 3. Those would be vertical angles, and they would be equal to one another. And angle 2 and angle 4, because again, they are right across from one another. So they're known as vertical angles. They share a vertex, and they're equal to one another. Okay, so that's linear and vertical angles. Now you're going to be given a picture with a bunch of angles. Okay, notice that we've got 7 angles in this picture that are labeled with numbers. And they're going to ask you to find pairs of angles that form a linear pair, pairs that are congruent, and pairs that are vertical. Okay, so remember, vertical angles are the ones that are congruent, not linear pairs. So in the first one, they want a pair of angles that make a linear pair. So we can name just any pair. So for example, the two that I see right off the back that make a 180 degree line are angle 2 and angle 3. But you could also do angle 5 and angle 8, or any of the other pairs that make a line. Okay, but they're only asking us to name one. In the next one, they ask you to name one pair of vertical angles. So remember, vertical angles share a vertex and are across from one another. So if I look at my picture, I see that angle 2 shares a vertex with angle 4 and it's across from one another. So I might use that as my pair of vertical angles, angle 2 and angle 4. But you could also use 6 and 8, right? Because those are also vertical angles, but they're only asking us to name one pair. And then for part C, they want us to name one pair of angles that are congruent. Well, remember, congruent are the same thing as the vertical angles. The vertical angles are always congruent to one another. So you could very well use the same exact pair that you just used in the vertical angles, or you could name a different pair, like angle 6 and angle 8. Okay? So those are the 3 types of questions they're going to ask you. And then when we get to this type of problem in ALEKS, it's going to ask you to do a little bit more work and have some variables in there. So you got to remember how to solve way back from Algebra Semester 1. You got to remember how to solve multi-step equations, okay? And you got to be able to recognize the linear pairs and the vertical angles. So, for example, look at example 3. We have 3 different angles that they give us. They give us the measure of this angle. They give us the measure of this angle right here. And they give us the measure of this angle right here. Okay, and they're using a bunch of letters to name these angles. And our job is to solve for how many degrees each of these letters equal, or the values of each of these letters. So first thing that I notice is that my x values, or the angles that have x values, form a line. So that means that they must add up to be 180 degrees. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write out my equation. So I have 12x plus 42. And if I add that to 10x plus 94, then I can now set that entire thing equal to 180 because they form a linear pair. So that would be my first step. So back to solving problems. First, we're going to combine like terms. So 12x plus 10x is 22x. And then we've got 42 plus 94, which is 136, is equal to 180. And then when we're going to solve, we're going to take away the 136 from both sides. And we get 22x equals 180 minus 136, which is 44. And then last and final step, I'm going to get rid of the 22 to solve for x by dividing. So my x value is 2. So one of my values takes a little bit of work when I'm trying to find the answer, because you have to set up a multi-step equation, okay? Then once I find one of the values, then I'm going to look for my sets of vertical angles. And you might notice that this angle right here in red is right across from the angle that represents C in yellow, which means that they are equal to one another. So I can plug my x back in to find out what the red angle is equal to. So if I plug x back in, I've got 12 times 2 plus 42. 12 times 2 is 24. Add 42 to that, and you have that angle measure is 66 degrees, okay? Since it's right across from the z, that means that the z must also be 66 degrees, okay? So once you find one, you have to plug it back in to find the other, okay? So this does take quite a bit of work. Let's try another example to make sure that we have it, okay? So first, look for those linear pairs. If I look for my linear pairs here, I know, again, we have 3 angles. Let's just label those. So we've got the red angle, which they call 6x plus 87. We've got the blue angle, which they call 63. And we've got the yellow angle, which they're calling z. Okay? Now, if I look for my linear pairs, I've got a couple. Technically, I have a linear pair here, but I cannot combine x and z, so I can't do that one. So that one would be a no. I wouldn't want to do that one. Okay, but there is another linear pair that does not combine 2 different variables, and that's these two, the blue and the red. those two will make a linear pair, which means, again, they add up to be equal 180. So I'm going to make my giant equation. 6x plus 87 plus 63 is equal to 180 degrees. And then we're going to combine like terms. 87 plus 63 is 150. Copy down the rest of my problem. Still got a plus 6x is equal to 180. Next step would be to take away the 150 from both sides. And we're left with 6x is equal to 30. And last step would be to divide both sides by 6. And x is 5. There's my value of x. So my x is going to be 5. Again, once we find the x, we can plug it back in, or we could look at the problem a little closely and look for those vertical angles. So notice that the z is right across from the blue angle, which is 63 degrees, which means, again, that they are vertical and equal angles. So that means my z value must be, right off the back, 63 degrees. Okay? So this one takes a little bit more time and a little bit more effort on your part with using a little bit of arithmetic. So take your time with this. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.